Hey guys, my name is Thomas Brush. I'm the creator of
Hey guys, my name is Thomas Brush. I'm the creator of a game called Pinstripe. I'm also working on a game called Once Upon a Coma. I love making games, but I gotta say that it can be a little bit complicated getting started. So I want to distill down those steps for you and give you 5 ways that you can get started in game development. So first, I want to quickly answer that looming question about getting a job in games. Do you really need to go to school, or can you bypass all of that money, expenses, and time and just get started learning games on your own? I mean, my recommendation right off the bat is to just don't go to game design school. And the reason is simply because game technologies tend to be changing so quickly. They're changing way faster than they used to. Spending 2 to 4 years learning the specifics of the industry will likely prove futile in the end. I mean, that's just my opinion. Examples of this are Unity and Unreal are constantly competing with one another to be the most simplistic and user-friendly, so they're always pushing updates and changes to their systems. There's a hair in my eye. They're constantly pushing updates to their software and removing content that might otherwise not really work for the current system. Obviously, there's changes to platforms too, right? Steam used to be the thing that indie developers wanted to release on. Now it's Switch and maybe even the Epic Store. So these schools are likely going to focus on the generalities of game design and development because they want to avoid the problem of the things that are constantly changing. I mean, but that brings another problem, and that's that generalities are honestly really easy to learn. You don't really need school to teach you these generalities. So I recommend teaching yourself. I mean, don't rely on a teacher or a boss or your friends or family to push you to be disciplined about learning. You don't really need that, and you especially don't need to pay for that. So be disciplined yourself. Spend 3 hours a day, I recommend 3 hours a day, learning the following 5 steps, and you'll be set. Now, I get it. If you're someone who struggles to be motivated, struggles to learn without direct person-to-person teaching, perhaps schooling is for you, and that's totally fine. I get it. You can choose from a plethora of schools. Here are my recommendations: Becker College, Full Sail University, and Savannah College of Art and Design. Those are great schools to learn games. Overall, I mean, everything you need to learn about game development is available online for free. Regardless, the following 5 steps to get into game development will apply to either students or just people who want to learn on their own. Now, step 1 is to learn Unity or Unreal. I mean, the good news here is both Unity and Unreal are absolutely free. Although Unreal, you got to pay 5% royalties on gross revenue, above $3,000 per product per quarter. Trust me, that 5% is a lot. I mean, I know it can seem really complicated, but 5% is a lot, especially when 30 to 35% is going to be going to a platform, and then another 20 to 30% might be going to a publisher. So if you choose to work with a publisher, that 5% can really be a lot of money, especially when you're getting a small cut. So that's why I recommend Unity, because it's just strictly free. They don't make you pay anything, along with the fact that it's really easy to learn. Now, without getting into the nitty-gritty, Unity uses a scripting language called C#, which is super easy to learn and to me makes a lot more sense than something out of the box like C++. The good news is Unreal has something called Blueprint, which means you don't really need to write C++ code. They kind of just can do it for you. Now, regardless, both tools are incredibly robust. I can't complain about either. I just really recommend Unity. Regarding out-of-the-box graphical capabilities, Unreal has certainly had a leg up on Unity in the past, but I think now Unity is starting to really compete with Unreal. I think by the time you release your game, maybe in a year or so, if that's what you plan on doing, I think Unity will probably be comparable to Unreal's graphical capabilities. That's just my gut feeling. I can sense that a few of you probably have some comments about this, so please let me know in the comments below what you think about Unity and Unreal's graphical capabilities. Now, ultimately, I recommend you just download Unity and get started. I mean, it's the perfect tools for making games. Now, I've made 2 games with Unity, Pinstripe and Once Upon a Coma. Because of Unity, I've been able to support my indie game studio, also pay the bills and pay for my family's bills. I mean, it's an incredible tool. Honestly, I thank Unity, and this isn't a sponsored video. I just thank Unity for how free, available, and amazing the tool is. Now, Unity can port to pretty much every platform under the sun, and this is true for Unreal as well. You can port to PC, Mac, Linux, iOS, Android, Xbox, PS4, and even Nintendo Switch, and that's really cool. And we'll talk about that in a second. I've released Pinstripe, my game about a minister on hell, on all of these. Most recently is Nintendo Switch, and actually we're porting to mobile right now, so we haven't released on mobile just yet. But Unity has had some incredibly simple resources available in conjunction with each of these platforms. Now I can tell the relationship Unity has with all of these platforms is really tight. It's really good because every time Unity has an update, the APIs available for all of these platforms have an update pretty fast once Unity's done an update. It's really amazing how quickly these updates are, and these platforms are never really behind. Now that you've downloaded Unity or Unreal and learned the basics of code, it's time to start doing artwork and environment art. So one final side note before we get into that is there are plenty of other Unity and Unreal competitors out there, I get that. But the truth is Unity and Unreal will probably be best suited for your long-term goals. Although currently maybe your idea would be best suited on something like GameMaker, that's more of a short-term strategy. I think long-term you want to go with the big guys because they're going to be pushing updates and they're going to be hanging out with the platforms, especially the new platforms that are coming out, especially something like Epic Games Store. So step 2 is to learn your art creation tool of choice. Plenty of indies like making 3D games, but I know my audience and a lot of indies out there certainly prefer making 2D games, especially for their first game, simply because of budgetary constraints. Simplistic 2D art is fairly straightforward to create, and more importantly, when you get to the QA phase, there's not a ton of roadblocks and speed bumps for releasing your game. Materials, textures, lighting, and 3D art can bring a project to a grinding halt, believe me, depending on your platform's limitations. 2D art, if approached simplistically, meaning not a ton of lighting and crazy materials and 4K artwork, it tends to be friendly across all platforms. Trust me, Pinstripe was developed over the course of 5 years. I mean, 5 years is a long time to become better at something. Starting out, I was terrible at making games, so if you look under the hood of Pinstripe, the code is terrible. But because it was a 2D game, it was economical, it was efficient, and it released on all platforms pretty well. All that said, here are the tools you can use for 2D art. We'll talk about 3D art in a second. So obviously we'll start off with Photoshop, which is my first choice for creating character art, environment art, and pretty much everything else, including UI. Some people critique me for this, telling me I should be using Illustrator. Honestly though, when I use Illustrator, I'm kind of a layman, so when I use Illustrator, it's really slow and it's incredibly complicated. I like things to be flat, simplistic, clean, and not really take up a lot of the computer's RAM. I have no idea why Illustrator is slow for me on Mac, but it just is, so I go with Photoshop. I mean, also there's some pretty sweet plugins with Photoshop in Unity. So for example, there's something called Photoshop to Layers, and that's really awesome because Unity can take a Photoshop file and break down the layers, convert them to PNGs, and then build a game object with all those layers inside. So you're literally going from Photoshop to Unity, and everything is already layered in Unity, and that's pretty cool. All right, 2, after I import my Photoshop layers into Unity, break up the layers, and build the scenes, it's really time for me to start animating, okay? So I take layers from Photoshop, and I bring them into something called Spine 2D. Now, Spine 2D is made by a company called Esoteric. I mean, Unity is doing something very similar that Esoteric is doing. So Unity's recent release of 2018.1 actually includes a lot of the features that Spine uses, but we're going to talk about Spine right now. So Spine basically allows you to create simplistic bones, attach your PNG graphics from Photoshop, and start using your characters in Unity. I mean, it's incredibly simple to master, and I highly recommend this method. Making an old school game like Cuphead or Hollow Knight, it might be better to do sprite sheets. But for me, I love doing Spine 2D skeletons because it's just a lot easier to animate and it doesn't have to be too complicated and also heavy. We don't have a ton of different sprites. We've just got one set of sprites that we can animate multiple animations. Now, obviously, these tools can change if you're going to be making a 3D game. I can't tell you how many times I've been told how amazing Blender is. I mean, Blender is a free tool to make 3D artwork, whether it's simplistic 3D artwork or very complicated artwork. Blender really is an amazing tool, so you should check it out. They've actually had a recent release. So for those of you who have heard that Blender is very complicated, they've actually been doing a recent release that will make it much more simplistic to learn. Now, if you're just going to be making 2D games and don't really care about 3D games, ignore everything I just said. But ultimately, don't stress if you feel like you can't create 2D or 3D models. Believe it or not, the first video game ever made was in 1958 by this physicist called William Higginbotham, I think is how you say his name. He sounds like a physicist, doesn't he? It was basically Pong. Now I bring this up because back then making game art, let alone just games, required scientists and very intelligent creatives to be making artwork and getting these games finished. Now, starting maybe in 2010 until now, Unity started offering, and Unreal does this as well, started offering paid and free pre-made assets, so artwork or development tools. So this is a great opportunity for people who don't really want to make artwork to still make games without having to hire an artist to do this. Just promise me that if you're going this route, you'll try and personalize the artwork and the pre-made tools that you're downloading. You don't want to do an asset flip. Rather, you want to be personal and personalize the artwork that you're downloading. A great example of this is taking pre-made assets and making them your own is a game called The First Tree. I mean, it's an amazing game, it's beautiful, and I recommend you give it a look. It uses assets from Unity's store, including art and development tools. Now, step 3 for getting into game development is learning your sound design tool of choice. I'm not going to linger on this for too long simply because discussions about sound design best practices are a bit of a mixed bag. But it's really hard for me to offer up specifics, but I will tell you that creating great sounds for my games has always felt a little bit like the Wild West. From freesound.org to productioncrate.com and other paid services, I tend to bring various downloaded Foley sound effects into a free program called Audacity, so you should download that immediately. Just mess around until your sounds feel right. Audacity has some great tools that are really easy to learn and also some really cool effects. So just to mess around until it feels right. And before we get into exactly what makes a great sound effect, you really should know where you can get these Foley sound effects from, and a lot of them are free. Some websites that I find myself hanging out on a lot are freesound.org is the first one. Now I've been downloading sounds from this public library for almost 12 years. Man, was I like 16? I was 16 years old when I started using it. Obviously, there's plenty of awful sounds here, trust me, but overall, you'll likely find what you're looking for. You can just download multiple sound effects, sort of piece them together to get the sounds that you like. I mean, even movies like Star Wars, the original Star Wars movie, they would take multiple Foley sound effects that you wouldn't think would make sense, combine them, and then it would be this amazing sound of a TIE fighter. So it's incredible. You should actually watch a documentary on it. It's pretty cool. It'll help you learn sound design. Now, the second website is kind of the opposite of freesound.org, and that is Production Crate. Production Crate is almost completely opposite simply because it's a paid service and it's fairly limited in terms of its library to freesound.org. Now the sounds on here are high quality and really showcase what makes a great sound effect. Again, we'll talk about that in just a second. So for $70 a year, it's really hard to say no to this. And don't let me forget to mention that Production Crate has some awesome music and video effects as well. So this is perfect for throwing together an epic trailer in a hurry, and we'll talk about trailers in a second. So that's a way to kill two birds with one stone. You can get great effects for your trailers while also get really great sound effects for your games. Production Crate is awesome. Take a look. Now there's plenty of other sites with sound effects, obviously, like 99sounds.org, noiseforfun.com, incompetech.com, opengameart.org, or raisedbeaches.com. I mean, the lists can go on and on. Honestly, though, I would just stick with freesound.org and Production Crate. I mean, they're going to serve your needs, and it's not expensive at all. So take a look at both those websites. All right, let's jump into what makes a great sound effect really quickly. I know it feels weird for me to get so specific about this, but a few key points will save you a lot of confusion in the future. And I just had this problem yesterday where I was wondering why my game sucked. There was a part of my game that really sucked, and I couldn't figure out why. And it was just because of the sound effect. The sound effect wasn't snappy, it didn't feel right. So I'm going to talk about some quick tips about how you can make your sounds feel great and make your game even better. I mean, first, your sounds typically should include a good amount of bass and treble. I mean, this is bass, and this is treble, and then this is them combined. See how it feels full? I typically have to find two sound effects to achieve this and combine them, and I can use something called Equalizer in Audacity to make both bass and treble happen with my sound effects. Obviously, this takes practice. I've been doing this for over 10 years now, but just be sure that when you're comparing your sounds, you're comparing them to really great games who do this well. Obviously, a game like Hollow Knight does a really good job of making their sounds feel good. They feel bassy, they feel trebly, if that's a word, makes them feel alive. So just compare your sound effects to great games out there. Now, I've found the simpler the sounds, the better. And I know this sounds weird since we were just talking about Star Wars combining sound effects. So if you're not making a sci-fi game, simpler sounds are probably the best bet here. A great example of this is a game like Below, where they take very simple, clean, raw sound effects and they don't really mess with them too much, as opposed to someone like me who spent all of yesterday trying to figure out how to get a pile of leaves, a xylophone, and a whooshing sound to be the sound of collecting a heart in the game. And then I finally found a sound effect for a triangle, and it was really like simple and it made sense, and I felt kind of guilty, like I didn't spend much time getting this sound effect to work, but it just works. Honestly, there's no reason to be cocky about this. Just get a great sound and move forward with your game. Sometimes I find myself trying to be a little bit too creative, when in reality, you can be pretty simple, like games like Below. Finally, if you're having trouble finding awesome sound effects, just use instruments in GarageBand, which is free, or Logic Pro, or Pro Tools, or FL Studio. They have some awesome live instruments that you can use to get some great sounds. Believe it or not, games like Breath of the Wild do this amazingly well. If you ever open up the menu in Breath of the Wild, you'll notice that a lot of the sound effects of selecting certain UI elements are actually just simple, clean instruments. All right, the fourth step, man, I hate talking about the fourth step, but we got to do it, is beta testing. Look, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty about beta testing, mainly because I already made a video about this and I don't really want to keep talking about it, but it's the most painful part of game development. I mean, honestly, we got to do it though, because we can't really see our own games the way that maybe our audience will see them. So it's really good to get their perspective. I mean, honestly though, it's just a depressing part. So let's kind of get through this here. For beta testing, you really can approach it as casually as you like, but I recommend doing it in a specific order. And here it is. First, I reach out to my audience on all social media platforms, and I collect email addresses of willing participants. Then I send them a Steam key, a survey, and instructions. Finally, I try and incentivize or just communicate how important it is to my beta testers that they complete the survey. Don't send out a Steam key and not remind them to do a survey, because people will just play the game and not do a survey. No malintent here, they just might forget. All right. Finally, you collect the data and the things the players that they hate, the bugs, other comments they have. And here's a little tip. Maybe drink a little bit of whiskey while reading this, because you're going to need it. It's tough. All right, I can't overstate how important this step is. Please don't skip it. I know I hate it, and I know you'll probably hate it. Don't skip it though. You're likely going to launch and your game will fail because you just didn't have the perspective of your audience. Maybe you had a little bit of rose-colored glasses on for your game. Now, technically, emotionally, mechanically, they're going to be able to tell you how your game is failing. So you really need to be listening to people outside of your studio. Now, finally, the fifth step to getting into game development and ultimately launching a game is, well, launching a game. A launch on one platform can be completely different than the launch on another. I mean, preparing for the launch of Xbox, for example, is really like nitty gritty. There's a lot of things you got to do to sort of conform to the standards that Xbox and Microsoft has for their games. Whereas something like Steam, they're not really going to tell you what you can and can't do. You just launch your game. It's really amazing. So if you're going to be launching a game, Steam is really the easiest option to do. Believe it or not, Nintendo Switch isn't that challenging either. But if you're going to be doing a simultaneous launch, you're going to need to put a lot of effort into getting these games built and ready to perform well on each platform. It can take a lot of time. So for me, because I'm such a small studio, it's just me, I usually launch on one platform and then another and then another and then another. This reduces revenue, but you know, honestly, is it even possible for a one-man studio to release on every platform? I mean, I don't know. You tell me. But I really don't want to be focusing on the specific platforms right now regarding launching a game. I'd rather focus on marketing to release on those platforms. Marketing is really the most important part here. Marketing preparation should really be taking you about 40 hours a week for a month. That's really how much time you should be spending on marketing. I know it sounds like a lot, but just remember how hard you worked on your game to begin with. Finish strong here. Don't walk the final lap of the marathon. The 40 hours of work per week for a month should consist of the following: compiling a list of 150 to 200 personal, and don't let me understate that, personal email addresses of games journalists and YouTubers who might take an interest in your game. Now, I'll make another video soon explaining how you can find journalists who will likely enjoy your game. An example is you don't really want to find a journalist who is an MMO enthusiast and you're telling them about your art game. They'll give you a bad score, and you don't want that. You should also be spending your time building out a show-stopping trailer, okay? All I could say here is plan to iterate, just like you did with your game. A good rule of thumb is don't be self-impressed with your trailer, because the first iteration of it probably sucks. Pretend you're Reddit's most pissed off user, and then watch your trailer and then critique it. Be critical, because you really want to make this thing pop. It's what's going to sell your game. Be sure it's around 1.5 to 2 minutes long, include your logo, links, etc. You probably know the drill here. Now, finally, get your audience ready. When you're gonna launch a game, you wanna be utilizing your audience. Even if you have 1,000 followers total, and that's about it on all social media platforms, that's great. If you can get 10% of them to grab a copy of your game and write a review, that's awesome. Now just remember, you can't be giving free games, especially like free Steam games, out to your audience and then hope that you can get great reviews on Steam. It doesn't work that way. Steam actually ignores the value of a good review from someone who got the game for free. So you really want to tell your audience on social media how important it is that they can go buy your game, and let them know it's at a discount. Maybe if you're launching at a 20% discount, let your followers know that for a limited time, they can get your game for 20% discount. And then tell them emphatically how important it is that you get a review, because reviews will help your game get into the atmosphere. All right, requesting a review from your followers, just FYI, you don't need to feel bad about this. Don't feel bad about tooting your own horn, because your followers are likely going to want to see you succeed, because frankly, they've been following you for maybe a year. Like if you've been working on your game for a year, they really want to see you succeed, and they'll likely be much more incentivized to go purchase a copy of your game and write a review if you're honest with them and tell them how important they are to your studio. All right, so that's it. Not bad, right? It might seem complicated to get into game development, but trust me, this is just a lot of words spewing out of my mouth. I know I talk kind of fast. In hindsight, looking back, it really wasn't that complicated for me to release a game on a platform. I made a lot of missteps, so I'm glad you're watching videos like this, because I certainly didn't. Honestly, this is a really good piece of advice. Budget for stress. Budget for anxiety. Budget for worrying, and I mean budget in here. Plan for it, because every game kind of feels like building a house of cards. It's part of the process. Making games is a challenging thing. Everyone's going to stress about it. So if you budget for it, if you plan on it, believe it or not, you probably won't stress or worry as much. I used to feel so stressed out because I felt like I was the only person making games that felt stressed, when in reality, you're putting together a new world. You're playing God with code, and you're using all these different plugins, all these different platforms and systems. It can be really stressful, so don't stress out. It's really a lot of fun when you learn to get used to living in transition. I mean, honestly, all of us need to live in transition, regardless of whether we're making games or not. Life changes, things change. Get used to it, learn to love it. I certainly have, and I'm much happier and less anxious for it. Again, my name is Thomas Brush. I make video games for a living. I love what I do, and I love posting videos about it. I post bi-weekly. If you want to subscribe to this channel, I would love for you to do that. Hit the bell icon to get notified of my bi-weekly video posts, and leave a comment. I'll try to answer any questions you have. Finally, I just want to let you know that Patreon is a huge way for me to pay the bills and run this studio. I have a link to Patreon in the description. There's a lot of cool tiers. You can actually get your name included in the next video, and I love doing that, giving shout outs to my supporters. And also, I'm doing this new thing where I actually want to help you. I want to coach you. I want to be your mentor and your advisor, and maybe even your creative director for your game. If that interests you, head on over to Patreon. There is a tier for me to mentor you and be your advisor. I'd love to help you out and coach you. Thanks again, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.